So I used to be really into the Marvel Comics mythos around the time I was in late primary school up until later high school. The film's my gateway, obviously, but the comics and their visceral, pulpy lore really enchanted my budding imagination. The comics then were available in scans online, illegally I would suppose, although now you can actually do that legally via Marvel now, which is pretty amazing actually, good on them. I guess they can more than afford to now. The films, and then comics, which appealed to me the most was definitely the X-Men. Amazing group of characters, awesome espionage kind of formula, plus a really specifically science fiction mentality, more so than superhero even, and the finest rogues gallery in the history of comic book masked vigilante fiction. In addition to an awesome animated series from the 90s, which holds up fairly well actually, it was so easy to become absorbed into the X-Men's fictional timeline. Sadly, whilst one can always enjoy that amazing Claremont/Byrne run, the live-action films from the 2000s, that initial and once beloved trilogy, they haven't held up that well, at least for me. The first X-Men film is just kind of bad, really. X2 is passable to some extent, and The Last Stand just isn't very good, as everyone already knows. Then that X-Men Origins Wolverine thing is so substandard, it's just a meme at this point, right? First Class is not amazing, but is actually better than any of the previous X-Men film adaptations. I found the Wolverine to be quite bland, though I guess better than the Origins thing. Days of Future Past, I remember seeing this at the cinema with my dad. We had both liked the previous X-Men films. I think by 2009 we'd both seen the trilogy, and we would have seen Origins, First Class, and Wolverine at the cinema. And so then this one, an apotheosis and ultimate celebration of the X-Men films. The X-Men films end all X-Men films. And it is easily the best film based off of a Marvel Comics property, as well as far and away the best X-Men film, towering over every film released since as well. Oh, and we'll get to that in a minute or so. I dig the initial Joss Whedon Avengers from 2012, as we all know, and I might still have a mild soft spot for 2015's Age of Ultron, its Whedon-helmed follow-up. Although other than those two, I don't care for the MCU, I find it pretty bland and uninteresting. Outside of the MCU, I don't care for the other Marvel film adaptations either, except for Days of Future Past, of course. So I'm pretty ambivalent to Marvel Comics on film, as it were. And now onto the inexplicably brilliant Days of Future Past. Why inexplicably? Firstly, Bryan Singer was never that great, not even on The Usual Suspects. I never cared for that overrated rubbish. Him as a human being, I'm not even going to go there. His presence was no reason for this film to be any good at all, let's face it. But adapting perhaps the most iconic and revered of X-Men storylines, that pre-Terminator time travel classic, could that go wrong? You'd think not, because it obviously inspired everyone behind and in front of the camera to actually get their shit together and really attempt to compose a truly quality film. Days of Future Past was allegedly inspired by the classic Doctor Who Day of the Daleks serial and predates the Terminator's 1984 release. Interestingly, X-Men's Brood storyline predates Aliens, though obviously not Alien itself. The insect-like nature of the Brood, including a queen, reminds me of Cameron's Aliens as well. Anyway, Days of Future Past as an opening sequence I'm just outright jealous of. The desperation, the seriousness, the cleverness of their tactics, the despair, and then the silence as they wait for the film's storyline proper to begin. Days of Future Past's opening sequence, the ruthless Sentinels slaughtering the heroic mutants, it is executed with a callous fluidity, enforcing a tone of unforgiving cruelty toward its players. Maybe cruelty is the wrong word, but we never feel as though our characters have very strong plot armor, that everyone is vulnerable and can bleed. That's the kind of tone that is set for the rest of the narrative. It feels as though there are no quick, slick victories, anything can go wrong, the villains always have an advantage over the heroes, perhaps by virtue of their goals being more straightforward. Typically, the villains want to eliminate life, and the heroes seek to bring peace. The former is so much easier. Absolutely adore the opening sequence. Anything to do with its future timeline, I truly just love. And then I love the whole setting of the 1970s, utilising popular history and attempting to insert fictional elements within it, adding a legitimacy to comic book mythology via placing it into visual media from the relatively recent past. The use of Wolverine was amazing. It wasn't an annoying attempt to understand Wolverine's psyche or anything like that. It merely places him with an important use and role within this assigned mission, although it is not focused on him or about him. Perfect. It is more of a film about Xavier, Magneto, and Raven, aka Mystique. James McAvoy's Xavier I always really liked, although easily Days of Future Past is the finest showing from him. Same thing with Fassbender's Magneto. This is the ultimate Magneto film. Obviously we will love Ian McKellen's Mags, and that sequence in X2 is truly beyond legendary, likely the best in that film overall, And yet Days of Future Past depicts a Magneto which is true to both the sympathetic, traumatized vigilante savior and the vile, psychotic, bullying terrorist which compose Magneto's iconic pathos. Magneto may be the greatest supervillain in all of comic books, and possibly the great villain of all time, both a tragic, complicated figure and a megalomaniac over-the-top bwahaha cliche. Both are consistent with a traditional depiction of Magneto, and I utterly love that about him. You foolish X-Men had no idea that this was just all a plot by Magneto. Now, onto Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique. Yeah, I have to be honest, it became obvious that they amplified her role in this film, and possibly in First Class as well, back in 2011 earlier, due to her becoming an extremely popular actress in general. I think there is an idea for a character, but it is forced. A series of reaction shots does not make her character, honestly. We're informed of her motivation, it is very clear, and they didn't feel the need to make her a three-dimensional character beyond that. Hey, she follows the rules of character writing, she has a motivation. But yeah, it's so hackneyed and obvious. Anyway, mostly I really love X-Men Days of Future Past. I was very let down by how horrible 2016's X-Men Apocalypse was, despite featuring the same director and screenwriter, Simon Kinberg. I'm convinced that this particular film's artistic success was a fluke. I haven't even covered the brilliant Quicksilver sequence yet, with Jim Croce's Time in a Bottle. Glorious. One of the best scenes, if not the best, in superhero film history, surely. Immense praise for this film. I'm stunned by how much I like it considering the circumstances, but accept it wholly and unquestionably when I view the film itself. Seriously, a commendable classic.